the last group, and Matt was our guide, and I know he did a wonderful job. He was very nervous because he had a group of experts, and but he did a wonderful job. And we got an extra special treat in the room where the piano is, and Craig asked the violinist if he could play The Devil Went Down to Georgia. And at first he said, sir, I'm in 1912, and I'm not familiar with that name. And then he just very smoothly segued into The Devil Went Down to Georgia, and he picked up that fiddle, violin turned fiddle in that case, and played the fool out of that song. So that was a special little treat, and we enjoyed that. And then our very own Joshua Noble played the piano, and we all kind of sang along. So that was very nice. That was a special treat. And I know that we all appreciate Mary and her crew taking good care of us, both last night and today during the tour. We were going to shut the doors once everybody has come in, and it will cool down a little bit in here. The thermostats have been checked, but once we close the doors, it will start to cool down. We'll just be really still while we listen to our next group. This is about Titanic, Honor and Glory, and I have not heard or seen anything about it, so I'm very interested to hear all about what you guys do. We have Tom Linsky here, who's the director of Honor and Glory, and he's got his crew, and he will introduce them and tell you what they do. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much for that introduction. My name is Tom Linsky, and with me I have Matthew DeWinkler and Kyle Hudak. We also have Emma, my girlfriend, who has also been helping with the project, and Liesl Sauter. I don't see him right now. He's back. He's in the building somewhere. He's in the other room. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, we are with the project Titanic, Honor and Glory, which is a video game project where we are recreating the entire Titanic inside and out in as much authenticity as we possibly can. And when I say the entire Titanic, I don't just mean the grand staircase and some of the cabins and the places we know. I mean the places no one has ever seen before. With such a short-lived ship, it was not well documented. We're going to be going into some of the details on how we find information on these spaces, and we'll also be taking you on a little bit of a tour on what we've accomplished so far, a bit of a video show reel. We did bring a few other videos with us, including an animation of the sinking, which has not been publicly shown before. And maybe we'll play that if we get the time for it. And also during the roundtable sessions, you can come over to our multiple stands and try out the virtual reality headsets that we brought with us. We were doing that last night, which we were kind of just messing with the equipment and playing around, and we ended up getting about 1 or 2 dozen people coming down and staying there well past midnight to try it out. There were some emotional experiences, and there was a wonderful talk through by Bill Sauter, who was sitting with us and giving a history and some of the informative references that we used to even just figure out the little thermometers and the designs of some of the tiles. So anyway, I'm gonna jump right into this, and let me give you the mic for a moment and see if you'd like to say anything.
If you young men could sit down so we can see, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. Let's hit play, and then we'll sit down and get out of the way of everything that's pretty up here. So yeah, we'll let our visuals do most of the talking while we try to talk over it.
Your chairs, we have a chair.
The chair,
Now you're in front of us.
Yeah, you're pulling.
Just get behind
Don't block the ship, Tom.
Could you get behind us?
We'll hide, we'll just hide behind here.
You know, we're just going to sit down and
You watch it.
There you go.
Yeah.
just watch. We won't say anything.
So actually, I guess where we can start out with this is, why are we creating a Titanic video game? And what this started from was just a passion for Titanic. Like we've discovered here, everyone here has a passion for Titanic.
it was all of our interest. We did not start this out by saying we want to create a video game. Let's take Titanic and make it into something that people can explore because we love video games. Kyle here, for instance, this is Kyle's creation right here. He does the exterior of the ship. He brings it back to life. He was modeling the exterior just for fun, pretty much, in your spare time, just as I was. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, the way I got involved in this was back in 2010 or so. I was making a model of this old video game called Virtual Sailor, and I got the attention of the old project, and you remember that, and I eventually joined that, and I eventually found my way here, where I was modeling the exterior, and over time I ended up doing it more for the game. And I've gone through several iterations of it, including this version here, which isn't even the final version. The finished model is going to be immensely detailed. It's going to have everything you can imagine on it, right down to the labels on the individual fans, where you can be able to look at them and see the numbers that are on the fans and where they go, what they serve on the ship. And yeah.
Is there a reason why you decided to do digital modeling versus physical modeling? Because so many people here are talented and have created the classic Minicraft 1/350 scale models, for instance. I tried to do that and I completely failed at it. I'm also a perfectionist, and there's no way that I would have ever been able to create the detail that I wanted to put in one of those models to make it look like that. And that's the reason why I went to the digital world, where I could quickly change something once I learned it was incorrect. Because there's so much to learn, and those kits are somewhat, they have, there's a limitation to what those kits can create. And that's the reason why I knew that in the digital world, it's a lot easier and a lot cheaper to fix a correction, to make Titanic accurate to the way that I wanted her to be. So what was your reason, Kyle, to create the Titanic in the digital world?
Lack of space and money. Also, you can do a lot more with the digital model. If you get something wrong, you can fix it. You can very easily fix it. You can tweak it, and you can add as much detail as you want. You don't have to go, oh, I need to go and buy $500 worth of supplies to make this, even though you can build a decent model for cheaper than that. But I tried building models of the Titanic before. Before I got into 3D modeling, I tried building them out of construction paper, cardboard, card paper, balsa wood, and some other stuff. And I never finished anything. They're always too big. To this day, I have a 10-foot half-finished foam board hull. It's taking up space in the back room of my house, and I eventually gave up on trying to model things physically. There's just not enough money or space. So I eventually picked up 3D modeling, and really the reason I started modeling Titanic in the first place was because there was no decent model of Titanic out there, and I thought, you know what, I'm a sucker for detail. I think I'm going to try to do that, and that's how that started.
How'd you get into this whole thing, Tom?
I'm going to step over here to talk because I think I get feedback from the speaker over there. I don't know. It just happened. Next thing I know, I was just working on this game. In high school, I made a film about the Titanic, about the two telegraph operators. And after that, I just really wanted to convey the stories of those who were on board the Titanic, and the opportunity came up to work with these guys and make it into a video game. And it sort of just evolved from a fun hobby that we did in our spare time into this, which we're now trying to turn into a serious commercial venture. To add to what you guys were saying about physical versus digital models, you said this in private. Don't worry, it's not anything embarrassing. One of the main reasons you started was because you wanted to know what it was like to walk the decks. And with physical models, unless they're life-size or like a film set, you can't walk that deck. You most of the time can't even fit a camera into the decks to see what it actually looks like in first person. So this digital recreation kind of began as an opportunity for us to know what it would be like to to walk down one of the hallways, open up a door, and see what's inside, and then go sit down in that room. And as we were doing this for a small niche audience, we realized there's a much larger audience for this that we want to reach, not just because they want to see it as well, but also because we want to inspire people, especially younger people, to be interested in history.
That's a good reason, and that's the main reason why this is a video game, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, there's already a big market for video games, and it's already engaged with the younger generation. So by making this into a video game, and when I use the term video game, I mean it very tastefully. I don't mean we're making entertainment out of the disaster. But we're basically using this medium that is already engaging a lot of people to bring the Titanic back to life and inspire this interest in history. Let me tell you a quick story about something that happened 2 years ago. I want to say maybe a little more than 2 years ago. We always did a live event online for the Titanic's anniversary. And usually what we did was something in real time. We would do a podcast or a live stream. And we would have a clock with us, and we would talk, and we would usually get a couple hundred listeners. And we would tell the story of the Titanic as it was happening in real time on the anniversary. And one of the things we had in the back of our mind for a few years was, well, we should animate it. We should actually take our assets from the game and put it together into a video. And we were coming up on the 2016 anniversary, and we said, well, what do we want to do this year? Well, let's do that idea. Let's make an animation, and we'll post the video. And then we realized we were 8 days away from the anniversary. So hardly any of us have slept during that time, and it was a very overwhelming week. We didn't know if we would get it done, and eventually we just decided we would throw something together. I hate to say it, but we were going to just throw something together, post it online for the anniversary, go through the live stream, and then delete it. And then eventually, when we have more time to put into it, we would do something a little bit more professional, a little bit better researched, certainly with better graphics and better animation, and a lot more details. So we posted the video. Matt and I were actually in New York City at the time because we were there for the unveiling of a plaque in honor of a Titanic passenger, Father Thomas Biles. And we were up in New York. It was April 14th. The video was already uploaded. We uploaded it in advance. It was a massive file. We didn't know how long it would take, so we did it a couple days in advance. And
Because it was real time.
yeah, it was real time. It was a 2-hour and 40-minute video. So we're sitting at this unveiling ceremony. We didn't even do the live stream yet, and I pulled out my phone, and in about 5 hours, the video had 60,000 views. And we were like, oh boy.
I thought it was for all the wrong reasons at first, because you're either really popular for a good reason or you're really popular for a bad reason.
That's right. And then we were all racing home from New York City to get home in time for the live stream. And I remember I walked in 2 minutes before the Titanic hits the iceberg. So we pull up that live stream, we get the animation going, and we go through it. And as we're going through the live stream, before the ship is even gone, we're checking our phones and we're seeing news articles are coming out. I think Philadelphia's Fox 29 was the first major outlet to do coverage on it. And they said people are listening live to this explanation of the Titanic. And when we usually had about 100 or 200 or 300 listeners on a good day, I think we had 15,000 live. And within the next 2 days, the video had 10 million hits. So as I was saying to the smaller audience here last night, a lot of people like to think Titanic is dead, and everyone in this room knows it's not, and that was proof of it. And now that video, it's still online. It's embarrassing because it was supposed to be a temporary video, but it's we're not deleting it because of the publicity it gains our project, and it seems to be inspiring a lot of people. I think now it's up to 33 million views. Do you want to say anything about this, either of you, or do you want to jump on? Come on over here.
Do you want me to talk a little bit about the animation?
Yeah, let me just add one last thing real quick. The clip we have, which we might get to, is an updated version of that. It's only 10 minutes, and we'll skip through it. Here you go.
Yeah. Right. So, yeah, as he said, we got the animation done in about a week. we were up long nights. We had to figure out the basics of how the ship sank and some of the details. I had to get my virtual sailor model ready because that's what we ended up using in the animation we uploaded. And then I had to set up the ocean and the sky and a bunch of other aspects of the scene, light the model, and then the animation started. The engine we used to animate it, UE4, it has this really nifty little animation feature, and I spent day after day after day after day keyframing this thing to sync, and Tom was with me every step of the way, guiding me of how to bring the ship down. What angle should it be at this time? What angle should it be at this time? How fast should it be going? What direction? Which way is it listing? And all that. And there was a lot of going over the different times and angles and adjusting over and over. And then poor Matt here, he was stuck with me for about, how long was it?
That was a good night.
A good night, 15 hours, something like that. Yeah, it was, at any rate, the sun came up by the time we finished. We sat there for hours, just going one lifeboat to the next, animating the davits, cranking out, lowering them, and then sailing away from the ship.
And trying to get the key events that happened in the lifeboat. So if a lifeboat got stuck in the falls, we wanted to show that lifeboat being stuck. I'm not sure off the top of my head. Sorry, everybody. Sorry, Bill. I think it was lifeboat 14 that gets stuck at the end and it has to drop like 4 feet in the water or what have you. We had to animate that into it. Obviously 13 and 15, that entire incident, we animated that into it. So it's not just showing, like, you've seen animations before of the ship sinking and they're accelerated and they show lifeboats going down and like scooting away as fast as possible. Our lifeboats, we tried the best we could to get them to lower down as they would, sometimes scraping along the hull if the port list was a certain way. And then they would go off in the correct direction and the correct speed and the correct distance. So I think lifeboat 8 with the Countess of Ross, and that lifeboat got away pretty far, rowing away towards the light in the distance. So that was a mile away practically or something. And so it was interesting because this is all useful for our game too later on, because we could put the camera in each lifeboat and we can see what their perspective was on Titanic as it was sinking. And you can see how much variance there was between like an angle. So, for example, one lifeboat could have seen the ship sinking at a much shallower angle than another lifeboat that was by the stern, and it looks like the stern is all the way up in the air. And so this was almost like a pre-visualization for our final game.
I'm thinking it's more and more important that we actually do get to showing that clip, because as that clip is playing, the camera sort of cycles around, and you do see all these different perspectives. And the ship, for the most part, is in the low 20s in terms of degree of angle. It starts at like 21 by the time it breaks apart in the animation. I think we did 24. And as the camera is cycling around, if you're towards the front where the first funnel just fell, the ship looks like it's almost on a level keel and settling down. If you're towards the back, it looks vertical. And it really attests to why there were so many discrepancies in the people who saw it from the lifeboats. So let's move on a little bit from that, and I'm going to talk about what you guys see here and what the project itself is, because it's a lot more than just recreating the ship inside and out. We're going to just let this play in the background. If there's anything of real interest, we might point it out. But this is just walking through the model of the ship. This is our game. Some of the shots are new, and as it currently exists, some of them are actually quite old. So if you notice any shots that have lower graphics, that's because it is lower graphics, probably from a year or two ago. But if you know anything about animating or rendering things like this, this is all in real time. And when I say real time, I don't mean in the same kind of sense the video was, where the ship sinks in real time. I mean, the computer is showing this as you move through it. When they're rendering CGI for a film, they often have to let the computer draw out and calculate the lights and shadows for every single frame, and there's usually 24 to 30 frames per second in the average film. And sometimes each frame can take 24 hours. So you don't see those graphics in real time. However, here, this is real time, this is live. You can run around And as we are optimizing it and getting it to work on a more basic computer, you can play this on a home computer and run around and let it load at this speed, and it's smooth and comfortable. So anyway, also in the project, you play as a fictional character. However, you play as the only fictional character in the entire game. We chose to have the main player fictional because there's no historical identity we could assign to you without your actions changing their history. So you are now a fictional character, but you're surrounded by 2,200 other real-life people. Now, we can't actually have all 2,200 because that's too much for a computer to manage. However, we do currently have about 200 that you will be able to interact with. And a lot of these are the famous ones that we all know: Captain Smith, Thomas Andrews, Margaret Brown, Violet Jessup. But you also have some of the lesser-known Titanic personnel, some of the individual stokers, some of the third-class passengers, and actually it seems a lot of the second-class passengers are lesser-known than third-class. First-class passengers got a lot of attention. Third-class passengers were very vocal. Second-class passengers, with a few exceptions, kind of just faded away. So we are including as many of these as we can, and you will be able to talk to them and interact with them, or at the very least witness what they do during the voyage and the sinking. And with the conversation elements to the project, we actually are developing a very cutting-edge conversation mechanic. I can't go too much into it, and we also can't take all the credit for it because we are partnering with some people who have already been working on it. But it's very exciting because this project may be the very first work to be publicly released that includes this stuff. So not only is it groundbreaking in the sense of the standard we are achieving with historical authenticity and the integration of education into video game entertainment, but it will also be groundbreaking from a technological standpoint. Right now, Matt, why don't you talk about this room?
Okay. This is a rather famous sitting room on Titanic. It's C55 in the Regent's style. It's the Strauss sitting room, as everyone might know it as better. James Cameron famously went down to this room with his ROVs, and he photographed this clock still sitting on the mantle, bolted down, having survived the 2.5-mile trip down to the bottom of the ocean. And we recreated it here with ROV footage as accurately as we possibly could. I think we did this footage specifically for the National Geographic documentary that he did last year. So some of this was used in his documentary. My part of this project is the interior of the ship. That's my baby, that's what I work on, that's what I try to research and try to model. As Tom does the story with the characters, Kyle looks to do a lot of the exterior. I try to create the interior spaces of Titanic. And there's a lot that goes into that. And I know I had a lot of questions the other day when we did our impromptu pre-presentation last night, which was how do we figure out rooms on Titanic? Because as you all know, Titanic wasn't well photographed, Titanic wasn't well documented because she went down so quickly in her life. She only lasted several days and she wasn't photographed. And we talk about this a lot on our YouTube because we like to post a lot of our research online as we're developing this project because we want to share it with everybody. But the easiest way for us to do that is because Titanic had a sister ship, as you all know, Olympic and Britannic too, but she didn't get as much attention. But Olympic lasted quite a long time and was relatively well documented. But we have to figure out the differences between Olympic and Titanic, and they were quite numerous. For instance, we just left the room, but there were several differences in that sitting room. If you look at a photograph of Olympic's sitting room and compare it with the wreck of Titanic, because that room is actually relatively well preserved for all the cabins that are still in the wreck, which are destroyed and mangled due to the inflow of water and just being under the ocean for 100 years. There's a lot that's still there. And one of the interesting things that we discovered during this project was that by the time of Titanic, tastes seemed to have already been changed a little bit. And a lot of the gilding that was on the fireplace mantle and on the walls were absent on Titanic in the wreck. And you might think that, well, it's been 100 years, maybe that all washed away, for instance. Well, no, it's still present in areas around the room and on panels. It's still present in carvings right along the fireplace, but it's missing in key areas. And it seems that on surviving panels from Britannic that were discovered, that were never installed and used on other ships or sold off at auction after she sank in World War I, that were of similar designs to that room, they have no gilding as well. So it seems Olympic was kind of stuck in back in the times when everything was gilded and the moldings were painted with the gold, and that was changed by Titanic's time even. So between that year difference between Olympic and Titanic, there's so many little changes that we have to figure out. And again, there's differences in the first class dining room between Olympic and Titanic, and we had to look at the only photograph of Titanic to figure that out. So it hasn't been easy to create this ship, I think, is the point we're trying to get at right now. It's been a few years, and I think it's going to be a few more years. For instance, people also ask us, what was the hardest room to recreate in the project, the hardest space to build? And of course, that was the Grand Staircase, which is probably the most iconic space on Titanic. Because I like to argue, if you show the average Joe on the street a photograph of any ship with 4 smokestacks, you show them the Lusitania or the Aquitania or one of the German liners that have 4 funnels, and then you show them Titanic, they're just going to say, oh, that's Titanic, that's Titanic, that's Titanic. But if you show them a photograph of the Grand Staircase, albeit it's still Olympic's Grand Staircase, they're going to say, that's the Grand Staircase from Titanic. They're going to know that that staircase with the cherub and the clock and the dome belongs to Titanic. So you have to get that space right. So during the course of this project, recreating the Grand Staircase, I think, Kai, you said you went through several versions of your exterior model. I went through 6 versions of the Grand Staircase to get it accurate. And there's still little bits here and there that I know I have to go back and tweak, such as like a step that's out too far, or a cherub that needs to be updated and corrected because we have an artist amongst us right here who created a much more detailed one that marvels our cherub. It's amazing, so yes.
Yeah, and then of course, once Matt's done with the, any additional updates to it, I still have to go back through and, do some more optimizations and finer detailing, because that's still not done yet. We have a few carvings we gotta do, and, we're going all out with this. You'll be able to walk, you can already do it in Demo 3, but in the final game, you'll be able to walk through the entire staircase and look at every little detail. And if you're in VR, you can look at everything even better. And you can look at these carvings, how they're going to be. And they're going to be a little different from what you see in Olympic, partly, because of course they were going to be different, but we don't know what they look like. So we have a little bit of creative freedom, but we're going to make them, as plausible as possible. And in some cases, we might just make them look like Olympic, if we can. But everything's going to be there. All the molding everywhere, every newel post, everything is going to be detailed, and you can look at it and go, wow, the amount of work that went into this room is astounding, and you're going to be able to admire this work, and you'll be able to think back to the people who built it. Yes, their work.
That's what we think when we create this. We're not creating. Sorry, Tom. We're not creating something from scratch. We're replicating the work of talented artists of the past, and that's one of the main reasons why we have to get this correct. Besides, honoring Titanic and her legacy and her passengers, hundreds of thousands of craftsmen spent millions of man-hours working on these ships. They put their lives into this, and sometimes you forget about that when you're working on a project or if you're writing a book or something about this subject. The human element can just vanish for a little while because you're working on your work, basically. But then you'll suddenly realize, which happens to me once in a while, like I'll be working in a cabin and getting it right, and I'll look at the number and be like, this is Edith Russell's cabin. I know her story. I know what happened to her. I know everything about her. And it suddenly hits me that you're recreating her space, or you're recreating the room of where the crew were birthed on E-Deck, and that half of them did not survive. This is, this bunk that I'm now putting into this room in 3D and digital. This is, in real life, this is where they slept for the last time of their lives, So there's always a human element that comes back to you suddenly and abruptly when you're working on this, I think. Not for time.
Hi, everybody. Kyle mentioned something called Demo 3, and what that is, I'm sure some of you know, is we've been putting out demos, which are free samples of the project where you can download it onto your home computer. Right now it is PC only, but we might have a Mac version very soon. And if you have your own home virtual reality system, you can set that up and experience that even in this free sample. And you explore quite a bit of the ship. It's only about 3% of the ship's floor space, but it's a lot. This is the third one we've done, and even if you don't have virtual reality, you can still play it normally. And as a testament to how popular the Titanic is, as I said earlier, the video had 33 million hits. This demo has been downloaded, and we've never once advertised it. No marketing was done at all. We would say on our YouTube, hey, we've done this demo, go check it out, or we would say that on our Facebook, but we've never done any paid advertising. And it's been downloaded over 350,000 times by different people. So that goes to show how much the Titanic still continues, and certainly how much of an impact this project is having on a lot of people, which is both an honor and quite humbling. We're in second class here right now. Second class is a part of the ship that very rarely gets attention. As I said, especially with the passengers, their stories don't really get told as much. But we're out of second class already. See?
We're saving it.
Yeah, we are. We've been doing our best to tell everyone's stories, and in building this ship, even just the physical parts of the ship, we are telling a lot of these tales that have never been told before. As to elaborate on what Matt was just saying, there are parts of these models where you have a connection to a part of the Titanic story. On the very stern of the ship, on the back railing of the poop deck, which is essentially complete for the project, it's always kind of touching to see it and to progress on that part, because you know this is the last place where so many people stayed and held on to the ship as it slipped under the waves. And also, one place that always touches me is the third class common room, because that's where a lot of the third class passengers were sent by the Titanic's crew, with every intention, by the way, on the part of the crew that they would eventually come and get them and try to figure out how to get them out of there, but they were just simply overwhelmed, even with the first and the second class passengers and the third class who were coming out on their own initiative to come up to the deck. They did not intend to leave them behind, but looking at that third class common space, you can understand how crowded it was, and how some of the passengers sat down at the piano and started playing to try to keep people calm, and you really understand how terrifying that night was and how terribly tragic it was in a lot of these specific rooms. By doing this, the Titanic is no longer the Titanic, and instead it becomes a series of spaces and different parts of the ship which make I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. It makes the story a little bit more broken down and a whole lot more intimate. I mean, right now, here we are in Boiler Room 6, which was ripped open in the side by the iceberg, as witnessed by Stoker Frederick Barrett. I always know it's Barrett, but for some reason I keep calling him the wrong person. I get the names mixed up, but I know who they are. So just seeing a lot of these places help you understand these specific stories more. Just last night, we were with Shelley, and she was able to stand with the VR. She was able to stand on the deck where her, was your grandmother?
Great-grandmother.
Great-grandmother and your grandfather were when the Titanic was sinking, and it puts you there. It helps you understand what it brings it more to life. I'm rambling now. Here you go.
Great, thanks so much. No, but it's true. You left during your important room.
I like this. So here is the Marconi room, which is essentially one of my favorite places of the ship, by the way. And there's a little Easter egg I had thrown in, Tom Swift and his wireless message. I love antique books, and Tom Swift is one of my favorite series, especially the original series. So actually, even though it's not Titanic, I'm going to elaborate on that for a second, because it shows the depth of authenticity that we're trying to go into. This is a book that most people haven't heard of. I did hear some people who seem to relate to it, so I guess there is some familiarity out there, but come on, if you weren't at some sort of historical convention, no one else would know it. But we even talked to experts to research what that cover looked like in 1911, because that book was published in 1911, so that would have to be a first edition right there. So what did that cover look like, and what did the spine look like, and even the back? So, I mean, this is what you can do if you don't have much of a life, so it's great. Anyway, right now we're still in the telegraph room, and as you're aware, the telegraph room, or the Marconi shack as they sometimes refer to it, was actually 3 rooms. There was the bedroom with double bunks, which is where the operators would have slept, and it looks very similar to the officers' quarters cabins, which we don't have to show. And then the middle room is this room. This is the telegraph room. It has 2 sets. One is the main set, one is the emergency set. And then the third and final room, which is in the opposite direction, is what's called the silent room, or sometimes called the dynamo room. And that's because it had all of the machinery in it that powered the telegraphs, mainly the emergency set. But there, this is a close-up. You might have seen in one of James Cameron's documentary, they get right up close to these switches. It was called the silent room because the machines were so loud that they actually padded the walls, or they insulated them, so that it kind of made a bit of a sound barrier. And if you close that heavy door, which is right behind the camera here, oh no, I'm sorry, it's right over there, it was essentially silent. And over there flashing, you see the rotary spark, which is what helps to send the signal. There, Matt.
Great, thank you.
Excuse me, Matt. Before you start
Oh,
up,
hi, Bill.
Hi, Bill. Would you like me to turn the lights out?
Yes.
Oh yeah, would that help everybody a little bit?
Oh, I can get
There's the lights for the forward area are right by the door. Those are the good ones. I'm getting blinded right here. Did that help at all?
Yeah, immensely.
Does this look familiar to everybody? We were just in there at the museum.
Because I think it's going to get dark soon. It's nighttime now.
When we get to the sleeping animation at the end of the clip, we can switch to my copy.
It's gonna happen.
For this sound.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have your little thing?
It's on the flash. Oh, yeah.
Your little speaker? Your little thing that saved the day the other day?
Yeah, I'll go get that.
Yeah. Great. Now I have to talk about stuff. Okay, so yeah, we're in the wheelhouse. A lot of the interesting little things. What else can we talk about, Kyle? So I don't want to talk about nerd things. Yeah, I can ramble on. Like I said, we're all.
Who are you talking to?
That's true, but I can ramble on about the little interior details of Titanic and how I go into little facets of like.
So I get very loud.
Okay, how I can get into like the correct tiles and the correct window patterns and such like that. But I want to talk about the grander scope of the project a little bit, if we can. If there's something we should mention.
Yeah, I'm gonna pause the video.
Okay.
Maybe, if I know how. Yes.
Yeah.
Go.
Okay, thanks. I didn't have a topic.
I think it was.
So these tiles.
All right. We're not just building the Titanic. We're incorporating as many elements of the Titanic story as we can. I talked about the people and I talked about the ship. But we are also including a rather large portion of the city of Southampton as it appeared in 1912. In fact, that's where the player will begin in the game. You are in the city, not just the docks, but actually in the city. If you're familiar, if you've been there, it's the area near Queen's Park. There's the Southwestern House Hotel there, and there's also Oxford Street. So we're including all of this as it actually appeared, which is being as researched as the rest of the ship is. We're also including the Nomadic, the Carpathia, and, well, the ports of call as well. We sometimes get some flack on our YouTube and on our Facebook from people saying, why are you wasting your time on that? We just want to see the Titanic. Stop doing that. And first off, it's our project. And, yeah.
Get over it, good Lord.
Oh, I told it last night, I'm not gonna tell that again. But you have to tell this story. We're actually also including the boat train, and you have to include all of that, because otherwise you're just jumping on the Titanic, which we all know. And therefore, if you begin on the Titanic, you're looking at it from a modern standpoint. You're looking at it from 2018 eyes, and that's your perspective, and you won't be able to fully immerse yourself. But if you begin off the Titanic, if you arrive on that train, and if you walk through the city of Southampton, which, by the way, was a horribly heavy hit city with a disaster with, I think, 500 losses. So you have to include that, because that gives you the context. That gives you the understanding that these are real people. You see some of their houses, for crying out loud. You walk down the street in the game, and you will pass where over 100 of them were living at the time of the Titanic. So it gives you more to relate to. It gives you a better understanding of what 1912 was. It reminds you that this is not a movie. This is not Jack and Rose. This is not something fun that we're going to tell. You're not going to hear a wonderful love story. Instead, you're going to learn about real people who existed, real people who died, families that really were broken apart, and you're going to hopefully walk away with a much better understanding for the Titanic, and for horrible moments in history in general. Would you like to add something to that?
It's going to sound inappropriate. Yeah, but it's going to be fun too, because it's a game. I like to kind of joke a little bit and say that we're going to trick our audience into learning about Titanic. You know, they're not going to know. They're not going to realize that they're going to basically be reading a book as they're playing the levels of the game. They're going to be researching passengers, but that's what we're going to do. They're going to be believing. We're sinking right now. They're not going to. I can't hear over the waves of the ocean.
I know.
Okay. Anyway, I have a good point. Now I lost it because I got water in my ear. They're not going to understand that they're going to be doing a mission or a quest in the storyline of the game. You know, if you ever played a video game such as this, you have like little missions to do. You have to go and find somebody, or you have to go retrieve an object and pass it along. You know, something to do for a story mission. But you're getting an object from like a second officer Lightoller, for instance, and you're going to learn about him. You're going to interact about him. You're going to figure out what his story was, and that's how we're going to, like I keep saying, trick our audience, which is hopefully the younger generation, even below us, like Jeb's age, into learning about it. Shout out to Jeb. Yeah, he's like one of the few who aren't just trying to buy video games that have guns and shoot zombies left and right. So yes, so that's pretty cool. I guess we're going to sync now.
We're going to sync now. So make sure everybody has their life jackets on. Would you mind standing over there so it's all quiet?
Outside.
Just, yeah, we gotta spread a bit. All right, so this is what we actually intended for the real-time syncing to look like. And this is going to just be the last 10 minutes. I do have to warn you, it's if you get emotional, it is pretty intense. Even if the people don't move, it does get very chilling. I'm going to lower it down because it is kind of loud. And we are going to talk over it. So, yeah, there's a lot of screaming and there's a lot of loud noises. And like I said, I think I've lowered it down. You guys can hear me over that, right? All right. All right, so we didn't ever plan to show this publicly, so that's not. We don't have rights to use that song, but shh. All right, so anyway, what we're going to be witnessing is the final 10 minutes or so of the sinking of the Titanic, starting with the collapsible boats stuck up on the boat deck and really unable to escape. You can hear the band just about finishing up, and the stress sounds of the ship as it is starting to go. When we did this animation, the people are all just silhouettes. There's no detail to them aside from just the human shape, and then we put life jackets on them so that they kind of have a bit more definition. But in doing this, we actually researched the crowds in the final moments of the Titanic. We have rough estimates of how many people were trying to get in collapsible A here, how many people were running back, how many people were bottlenecked at the railing dividing the first class from the engineering promenade. There were some mistakes in our original real-time syncing, which we brought into this, and in a lot of these cases, it was mistakes that we were already aware of, but we just simply didn't have the time to flesh them out and include them, but we had the opportunity here. And these animations give us a better understanding. They're essentially rough drafts of what the final part of the game is going to be, because in the game, it ends with a real-time syncing. It's not just real-time for the video, but you actually will be able to experience for 2 hours and 40 minutes the syncing. And you will see people on board. So now the water is coming over the roof of the lounge here. It's coming up to the compass platform, and it's also reaching the second funnel. The first funnel has already fallen, and now we're going to start to pan back and see a wider shot of the ship as it is really angling up. Another important thing to note is pay attention to individual windows, and you will see them very slowly submerge. The ship is moving this entire time. The ship is not static and then it jumps ahead, but it actually is slowly disappearing under the water. And here we see the crowd of passengers already beginning to form on the poop deck, and they're also getting stuck around the aft end of the boat deck, the A-deck promenade around the main mast. We see the second funnel actually ignite. There's some eyewitness accounts that the coal dust inside it ignited and it went down in a shower of sparks. Sometimes people say that was the first funnel, sometimes they say it was the second funnel. It's very easy to make that mistake. We might have, but it is essentially the first funnel once the first funnel falls. At this point, the ship has essentially 5.5 minutes left before it is entirely out, and the camera crosses over the midship line and through the cloud of smoke that is left behind by the fallen second funnel. From here, you'll notice how it does look like the ship really is at a truly shallow line, and especially the people in the two collapsibles that floated off in collapsible A and B. A lot of them believe the ship was settling as opposed to going up on one angle. Also, if you're looking at it from this perspective, it's very easy to miss the breakup. You hear it, you certainly will hear it, but you don't really see it. It just goes black, and then it just continues settling. Right about now, the angle is about, at this point, would you say you had it to 22, 23 degrees?
Getting up there.
Yeah. We had it break at 24. It's also listing to the port a few degrees. I think we maxed it out at 9 or 10 degrees to port, and we had that list carry through until the breakup. It's very horrifying to look at this. And unfortunately, it is also very dark. The lighting on the ship was not what you see in the films. It's very often shown as overly bright, and quite understandably, if you're watching a movie, you want to see what's going on. I don't blame them for doing that. However, the Titanic was not well lit. Lights just simply were not that bright back then. And as a result, we try to accurately replicate that. Now here we are from looking almost straight on at the stern, and we're getting closer and closer to the waterline as the camera moves down, and you can really get the impression that the ship is going vertical. We try to be authentic with the sound effects as well. And you hear the metal stresses, you hear a lot of the groaning and the bulkheads really stressing and in some cases failing. This was the sound that was described in A Night to Remember by Walter Lord, with every loose item inside the ship coming loose, from furniture, beds, dressers, tables, chairs, to cargo, although the cargo is well submerged at this point, to even boilers, although I'm unaware of that actually happening. But the book describes that. But you would have heard a deafening rumble. As we pan around, the ship is reaching its max angle prior to the breakup. The lights are still burning brilliantly. And it's too dark. In the foreground, you're going to see lifeboat number 4, which is rowing out in this direction. And unlike in the previous animation, it actually has people in it rowing, trying to get away from the sinking liner. About how far away was lifeboat 4 when the ship went down?
I think I read they said like 100 yards or so.
You'll notice that some of the lights actually remain on, and this is the emergency lights. Sometimes when we show this to people, they think that's unbelievable that any of the power would have remained on, but they were powered by dynamos and batteries in the dynamos or batteries, Bill would know, in the stern area, and it has not submerged yet. You do see them start to fail as the water does reach that area. It tips over to its port side and begins to roll as it continues to go down by the exposed forward end of the stern. Now, Chief Baker Charles Yaukin would have been right about here. In fact, I think that specifically is him, or maybe that is. He would have been standing there, and because of the angle of the roll of the ship, he actually would have been kind of upright most of the time and fully capable of riding it down as an elevator as he described. That's right, stepped right off. And now the ship is gone.
A lot of black. A lot of black.
The people in the lifeboats actually reported hearing the ship breaking apart underneath the surface as it continued to fall to the ocean floor, and we did replicate that, but it was a bit hard to hear. Well, that was it. That was the redo of the sinking, and that was the final 10 minutes of it. We're going to open it up for questions now. I think we have about 7 minutes. Yes?
You mentioned that, did you say the boat trains were going to be in the game or no?
Yes.
And you also said the Carpathia?
Yes.
How is Californian going to be in the game?
Actually, to a certain extent, even in some of these videos, not this one, but if you watch the real-time video, you could see the lights of the Californian on the horizon, and you see them appear about the time it would have appeared and disappear about the time it would have disappeared, and you can really understand why the people on board the Titanic truly felt help was on its way. But yes, we are including as many ships in this to varying degrees. Some you can explore, some you can't. As many ships as we can that were involved in the Titanic story, including some of the lesser-known ones. The USS Chester, for example, which was a U.S. Navy cruiser that was sent out to escort the Carpathia into New York. So yeah, we're trying to tell the full story of the Titanic here. Yes?
How are you going to handle the time between the sinking and the lifeboats getting to the Carpathia?
I don't want to give any spoilers. But you're not gonna have to sit there the whole time.
Okay, that's what I was kind of getting.
Nah, don't worry. Although I'm sure some people would want to. Not me. Yes?
I just wanted to say that last 10 minutes there, the dark, how deceiving it is, I think we pretty much nailed it, because I spent an entire lifetime out at sea, and I know how inky black it can get out there, how misleading it can be, even on a perfectly clear night. And you just illustrated how it is. You could have a bunch of people looking right at the breakup and not realize it even happened.
Absolutely. It would have been an absolutely dark night that night on a poorly lit ship. I don't want to say poorly as an insult to the way the ship was designed, but just relatively speaking. And no moon, but many, many stars and a meteor shower. That would pretty much be the only lighting after the emergency set goes.
If anyone doesn't believe me, go out to sea sometime. Now, I don't mean on a liner. You can get on a freighter or something like that, and get away from the coastline on a moonless night, and you just see how very, very. It's a kind of dark you can't understand really until you've seen it for yourself. You just
Absolutely. Another question. Yes?
Yeah, I noticed that you had some of the cloth that was being held strangely in the curtains in the first, the small.
Oh, in the Regent Suite seat 55?
And then you had the tablecloth in the next suite, which was gold. It looked like you were trying to do a bouquet of some sort, and it was far too slick looking. How are you going to be doing? Are you going to be doing different textures and putting that in?
A lot of the cloth right now is modeled rigidly, which it's really just there for visuals. There's an extra step that has to be done with cloth like that so that it can actually blow in the breeze or move around in reaction to something bumping into it. That's an extra step that we have not yet gotten to. But Matt says that tablecloth is accurate. The curtains are a little rough there.
I'll show you a picture of it, yeah.
We believe.
Well, I'm sure you believe me, but it's amazing that the type of silks and fabrics they used. And if you look at the archival photographs, and if the light hits it correctly, it will give that shine that makes it almost look fake, like a plastic tablecloth on top of it. But it's true, and the same can be said for a lot of the furniture too. Some of the fabric pops in certain way, and it looks like it's recessed, and that's just the testament of how the craftsmanship and the expense they went into these suites on board Titanic and whatnot.
We're doing on time.
I throw it away. I'll be here in 2 seconds.
Yes.
Do you have any kind of timeline for this?
2 years from investment, and investment's looking good right now. Any other questions? Yes?
When is this going to be available for us?
2 years from investment. It's a 1.5 to 2 year production from the influx of capital. And right now we are in the stages of negotiations. But we still share everything online. We on our YouTube we do a new video every Monday. We post it. We aim for the morning of Monday weekly. The first Monday of the month we do a status update where we talk about what's new, what have we been up to. The second Monday is a question and answer session with our fans, and then after that we sometimes pick a different aspect of the production to talk about, or something with the history of the Titanic. We'll be uploading one on Monday, this coming Monday. Actually, that was filmed right here last night, about the virtual reality aspect of the game, but also what 1912 virtual reality was like, and I talk about a stereoscope and some of the parts.
Well, I was just kind of curious. Are you still asking investors, or are you still taking investors?
The door is open if anyone is interested. Yes?
How have you been supporting yourselves during this time?
Well, we do odd jobs on our own. Matt does accounting. I do freelance film work, and we do collect contributions to the project, but that goes towards this. I mean, this is quite expensive. It's been about $150,000 so far, and but the only time we actually get paid for anything is if we license footage out to a documentary, or just any licensing fees, and sometimes YouTube revenue.
Or the selling of the prints that we've been doing too, which are over there. So yes, they help too.
Yes?
Got a couple questions. Who are your consultants? So you have Bill, And who else do you have?
We have a number of consultants.
How
we have
closely do you work with them? Do you just
the
give a
key
call,
ones.
or-
There are three key ones that we work with almost on a daily basis. Is four, right? Is Bill Sauter, Ken Marshall, Park Stevenson, and Dan Clifton. But we also have a few other consultants who we work with to varying degrees whenever a certain technical element of the project comes up. Bill Wormstead, Tad Fitch, Kent Layton, and a bunch of others. And there's also niche consultants who might know the fashion or a specific person who's going to be in the game.
The other part was, how do you know the Titanic had all the corridors and everything? So this is built similar to the Britannic. Now, did you get the blueprints, from White Star Lines? I mean,
Bruce Beveridge.
A
what
lot
do
of
you use
that,
for,
a lot of that has come from our consultants, but Matt is going to be better on answering this one.
Bruce Beveridge has already published,
There- There's lots of,
I have a set.
oh yeah, there's lots of commercial plans out there that you can purchase and a lot of good resources, excuse me. But, so figure out a lot of the dimensions of the ship. We don't actually rely on Harlan Wolff plans that all the time. We go back to sources taken from Olympic later on in her life, such as when she was scrapped, for instance, and they have that gigantic auction catalog of I think 3,500 lots. When they scrapped her in the 30s, it was Depression era, so they sold as much from the ship as they possibly could, and they detailed a lot of her. So they would measure like the run of the paneling of the grand staircase, for instance, and they would say 9-foot high panel, 9-foot high walls, 36-foot run, and it's from B deck forward grand staircase, and you can just be able to decipher like, okay, it goes this way, that way, that way, that way, and that equals the 36-foot run. And, B deck is 9 feet high, so it's from B deck, and you can decipher it that way. The same with the corridors. They say like the tile, for instance, they give the square footage of the tile. Also, there's always tile artifacts for sale on eBay. I have several tiles, and you can match them with the tiles from the wreck of Titanic, so you know they're the same tiles, and you can measure the tiles and figure out the width of the corridors. And then, as almost like a litmus test, you can go back to the source Harlan Wolff plans and use their framing guide that they have along the center line of the ship. We know the frames are 36 inches apart, for instance, or 33. Use that as a little measurement tool and see if the corridor that they have there is roughly 48 inches, and if you've measured 48 inches, for instance, you're on the right track. So there's a lot of tools to figure out how big the spaces were on board Titanic. And often they used, well, not really that well. Sometimes they used round numbers and round footage. So it does make it simple. And this is a game, it's not going to be a precise manual where you can go in with a ruler and measure things. So there are ways for us to cheat it and make it still look accurate enough. You're not going to know that each cabin that we put in the forward section on the real Titanic, the ship curves in as you get forward. On our Titanic, since the save space for our game, these cabins are just going to repeat and they're going to be squares, but you'll never notice because you're inside the ship. When you're outside the ship, you see that curve, but when you're inside, there's furniture blocking the hull of the ship. You have wardrobes and beds, and so you don't see that curve. And that's ways for us to cheat it, because otherwise it would take us 15 more decades to finish this. It would take a computer, it would take 18 of those computers to run it, and it would take a lot more money too. So yes, there's way, like I said, I can go on about the technical things for a while, because I've done this so long now. But there's ways for us to figure out how the dimensions of rooms and such. Thank you.
I'll also say that we don't rely on any books or anything like that unless we're working with the authors. We rely heavily on our consultants and original source material. So if something is published, we generally don't refer to it unless we can really give the author a good background check, and in the ideal situation actually be in touch with them and ask what did you do here, why did you do it this way, what was your source on this. The other thing, in some of the stuff you saw, we actually put deliberate mistakes in, including in Demo 3. It will not be in the final product, but the reason for this is because there's a number of copycats out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other projects that when we started this, there was no other Titanic video game, not since the 90s, and then a few other small ones that weren't endeavoring to recreate the ship. Since we started it, there have been 7 that have popped up, because prior to that, people thought doing a Titanic game was impossible. And now, well, unfortunately, we've proven that it's not. And they download our free stuff, they watch our videos, and they copy as much as they can. But fortunately, because of these deliberate mistakes we put in there, we're able to spot them and say, you copied that, what's your source? And then they don't have one, and we basically have them cornered there. Not that we don't want to share or anything like that, but if you're doing a commercial venture to compete with us and using our material, there is a problem. I think we might have time for one more question. Yes, in the back.
Quickly.
At one time, Harlan and Wolf still had some prints, original prints. Do those still exist, and have you ever seen them?
We do have a lot of original source material from Harlan and Wolf. I mean, our collections are never complete, since we're still researchers, first and foremost, Titanic researchers. But a lot of the original plans from Harlan and Wolf have been invaluable to creating the exterior of the ship and the interior of the ship as well. So yes, we have seen some of those. So I know I was just bad-mouthing kind of using plans a little while ago, saying that no, we don't believe in using blueprints and such. But it's just, there's many aspects to how we get this entire project built. We don't rely on one thing. We have to make sure that we're double-checking ourselves as we go. There's a lot of cross-referencing. There's always cross-referencing. We always have to cover our rear. Maybe Bill can cover that easy because he covers my rear all the time.
I'm going to speak up because this is my interface with the Honor and Glory team. Harlan and Wolf has a large number of plans germane to the project, and I have copies of most of them. It's very easy to get overwhelmed. They're very complicated. Usually what happens is I will send a summary to Matt with the critical dimensions, and they'll proceed from there, because many dimensions can actually be estimated by eyeball if this is something you do on a regular basis. For instance, I'm a professional draftsman, and it's not at all beyond the realm to just walk in and estimate it as, okay, that's 9 inches, that's 6 inches, that's 4 inches. Matt has a similar talent, so it isn't necessary for me to be hyper-specific. But if a question does come up, we do have primary references that we can consult. And I'm making a distinction here because what is your name again?
My name right here?
No, guy next to you.
Oh, this one, Tom?
No,
Matt, Tom, fine.
as Tom alluded to, we really try to go to primary source material, original source material. Specification books, books drawn up for the officers, any memoranda that still survive. We try to go to that. We avoid going to secondary sources, which have been compiled by other authors. First of all, if we use their material, we're endorsing them. If we're endorsing them, shouldn't we be paying them? We prefer to keep the business in-house. So I think that, I hope that addresses the question you had.
Thank you, Bill. We're wrapping it up now. We will be over there during the roundtable sessions. You can come over, you can try the VR, and you can ask any other questions you'd like. We have things to sell, we have things to give out. Thank you very much, everybody.
Take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back to hear Joshua Noble, women and children first. 10 minutes, please.
How far is it? Oh, it's right here. I want to get everybody's signatures. You want to sign it?
We stayed last night.
Bye, everybody. Oh, wait, how do I do this? All right, there you go. There's a view of a room. And there's our stand. We might do some more live stream later. We did some last night during that impromptu session. But thanks everyone for tuning in, and take care.